Well, it's going to be heard over 4 days. Let's speak now to Anne-Marie Trevelyan, a Conservative MP and board member of the Vote Leave campaign, Chuka Umunna, a Labour MP who voted to remain in the EU, Stephen Gethin, the SNP spokesperson on Europe, Tom Brake, the Liberal Democrat Chief Whip, Peter Whittle, the Deputy Leader of UKIP, and we're also joined from our studio in Cardiff by Leanne, the Leader of Plaid Cymru. Thank you all very much for joining us. I'll come to you first of all, Stephen Gethin, because the SNP argued for Scotland's voice to be heard in the hearings at the Supreme Court. Why is this a matter for the courts? The people have had their say.
Well, we live in a parliamentary democracy, and since Vote Leave didn't give us any details about what their plans were, it's right that we scrutinise any plans. But furthermore, and this is important, democracy doesn't begin and end in Westminster. And the Westminster government has never legislated for areas of responsibility to the Scottish Parliament. Now, any plans to leave the European Union will have a significant impact on the areas of responsibility of the Scottish Parliament, the same with the Welsh Assembly and in Northern Ireland as well. So it's only right and proper that the Scottish Parliament has a say, just as it's had a say in issues when they've been raised in the past.
Leanne Wood, the Welsh Government will also have its voice heard at this hearing. The Welsh Government's top legal advisor saying very similar to the argument that we're just hearing from Stephen Gethin's. When Wales voted in the EU referendum, the margin in favour of leaving was 5%. So why go against that?
Well, we are concerned about the how we leave the European Union. We accept that people in Wales voted to leave, so the whether is decided. It's the how now is the question, and the incompetence and the rudderlessness that we see from the Tories in Westminster, the lack of a plan, the incoherence, there are grave dangers for Wales, and so we are not prepared to give the Tories a blank cheque and just back this no matter what. It's not a case for us all jumping off a cliff together. We will vote in the best interests of Wales, just in the same way as Stephen Gethin intends to vote in Scotland's best interests.
Anne-Marie Trevelyan, if the government is not making clear its position, people are agitating to actually try to work out what Brexit means.
Well, I think the government's being very clear. The view was taken after the referendum, which had a very clear mandate for leave, that they would now set about trickling out Article 50.
But no one knows what it means.
Well, I think it's very means. It means leaving the EU, the Customs Union, the ECJ authority, taking back control of our migration, of all those issues that we have, Trudeau, those arguments many times.
Those questions weren't on the ballot paper.
Those questions weren't on the ballot paper. The only question that was on the ballot paper, Joanna, was whether we remain or leave the European Union.
Absolutely.
What follows from that, Anne-Marie, we have no, the public has not opined on. That is something that they've entrusted to their representatives in Parliament to contribute to. And the problem at the moment, we don't live, the Prime Minister is behaving as if we live in some elected dictatorship. So she's saying that the country's voted to leave the European Union, and therefore I get to dictate the way in which that happens.
Why doesn't the government let Parliament discuss this? What's the problem? I mean, the MPs have said that they will back the will of the people.
I'm supremely relaxed about this. The point of living in parliamentary democracy with an independent judiciary, and we are so lucky as British citizens that we live in that environment, is that a member of our country has challenged what the government was proposing to do to meet what that referendum result said, and say, I think it should go through Parliament. Personally, I have no problem if that's where we end up.
Why is the government fighting this? It looks like the government is fighting...
Well, because it went to the High Court, a decision was taken. Government is regularly in the law courts on various issues. That's what governments do to test it. But the point is, we have set the laws, and if our independent judges reach the conclusion in the Supreme Court that we should put through a bill to trigger Article 50, I'm supremely confident of that, and I'm also supremely confident that actually we will have that go through, because there are way too many MPs, without a doubt, would not challenge the will of the people.
OK, well, Tom Brake, does the government have anything to fear then by this going through Parliament?
Well, I think not. I think the government has everything to gain, because I think what the government needs to recognise is that this is about parliamentary sovereignty. Parliamentary sovereignty was a major feature of the Brexit campaign. Now what the government should do is enable Parliament to have its say on this critical matter in relation to Article 50. What I hope that the government will also concede is that there should be a vote to allow people at the end of the process, but before we leave the European Union, to allow people to vote on what the government, what deal they have secured. Because, of course, we have, as Chuka was saying, people voted to leave the EU, fair enough, but what they did not vote for, because it was not explained, not on the table, was what position the government was going to adopt on a whole host of issues, from the single market through to the customs union, through to freedom of movement. And what we've heard from government ministers is very different positions articulated in the last 24 hours.
I just want to let Peter Whittle come in, because we're not having...
outrageous.
Yeah.
What you're basically saying is people are too thick to actually understand what they're being asked. People knew exactly what they were voting for. They knew exactly. What that meant was coming out of the EU, control of our borders and our own sovereignty. You talk about parliamentary sovereignty, Tom. You didn't care about that for years and years.
Daniel Hannan, one of the leading Brexit campaigners, was arguing for us to stay in the single
by the
market.
EU,
So they're
right?
completely
Do
different.
You do not care about
Can I
that.
just compare and
Completely
contrast something?
Hang on. Yeah.
During the Scottish independence referendum, there was a 670-page white paper. Now, many people didn't agree with that, and I accept that, and we lost. Plus, there were plans for consulting with all the parliamentary leaders in the event of a yes vote. And to be fair to David Cameron, he sat down with Alex Salmond and they hammered out an Edinburgh Agreement, so the question of legality was dealt with. Now, Vote Leave carried out an act of gross irresponsibility by campaigning on a blank piece of paper. The government are continuing that irresponsibility by 6 months on giving us no details. You know, Vote Leave was chaotic, and the way it's been dealt with by the government is utterly chaotic. And it's taking us down a road that will have an impact on jobs and the economy.
Okay.
This is completely
And
disingenuous.
every single person.
The point is,
The
the
referendum was a binary question. Vote Leave was the campaign group which was given the authority to actually run the campaign to leave, which was, as Peter says, very simple, which is to leave the EU. And so leaving the single market. Even the Prime Minister, who was fighting for Remain, was very clear that that's what it meant.
Well,
leaving
the
actually,
there was one. Joanna, if there was one key pledge that the Leave campaign made, it was that if we leave the European Union, £350 million extra per week will go to the NHS. That was something that 5 current cabinet ministers went around the country telling your viewers would happen, and we've seen precious little indication that it's
Is the only way now to be absolutely clear what the people want to have a general election? Because we've had the by-election in Richmond. Tom Brake, your party now has an MP saying she has a mandate to vote against against Article 50, because that's clearly been said by the constituents there.
What the by-election does, I think, it is tell our Prime Minister that she is supposed to be representing the whole of the country. She seems to have conveniently forgotten that 48% of people voted to remain, and she also appears to have forgotten that in that 52% who voted to leave, there were large numbers of people who actually wanted us, for instance, to stay in the single market. And she seems to have completely disregarded that and is now running on a hard Brexit agenda, a conservative hard Brexit agenda, which will do our economy a huge amount of damage.
These are lies. It would be very helpful, I think, for a lot of people, if, Tom, you could be clear what exactly you mean by a single market. Do you mean the internal market of trade with its customs unions? Is that what you're talking about? Because what is the single market to you? For me, there's control of our borders, there's the ECJ, there's a trading union or a free market agreement, which is what I want. What is it you talk about? When you say the single market, what do you mean? Because I don't know what you mean.
Well, what I'm saying to you, as one of the leading Brexit... Well, no, your party is in power. Your party has got to explain to people what it is roughly they're going to negotiate.
Well, and that's what we'll do.
We're going into the wider argument. I want to bring in Leanne Wood, because she's out of our studio, so she's finding it difficult to have her voice heard. Leanne Wood,
if we're looking at the claims that were made during the referendum, then a lot was said about the Norway model. Now, the Norway model retains our membership of the single market. It keeps an element of free movement of people, although there is an ability to restrict that by making available a place for people who have a job. Now, that is something that we could look at as something that would be a good model for Wales. It wouldn't put at risk the 200,000 jobs that rely on our access and membership to the single market.
That's just membership of the EU.
That's just membership. Norway are not a member of the EU. Norway are outside the EU, but they're inside the single market.
Sorry to interrupt you. I mean,
there's clearly paper. This is something that we
Yeah.
should consider for the future.
Yeah.
It
I mean,
should
wait,
be
hang
on
on,
the
hang on. I just want
If I can
to
just
ask
say
you,
one
well,
thing. The
how you
problem is-
think how you think this is playing in Europe, because we're hearing from Europe that they're looking at what's going on here and saying there is no clear
Well,
strategy.
I think the thing that we
Look,
have
but-
to illustrate is you
Well,
have to
I've
illustrate, and this
been
is why I
talking
think the noise is off that we had, certainly from the former leader of UKIP. There's a new one now, maybe he'll adopt a different approach. But in the end, if we want to get the best deal for the UK, which is I think what all of us want here,
Indeed.
we have different views on what that might look like. That's what we want to get.
That's
you
politics.
have to illustrate that there is a self-interest for the other 27 member states to give us the deal that we want as well as for us. So we've got to be able to put enough on the table that shows actually
But
what
take
we, what,
the
say-
country.
we'll say-
How important? It's important, isn't it, to take the country, obviously the 52% who
Yes.
voted out, to actually get it right in
Oh, yeah,
terms
no,
of what was
absolutely.
intended, and it's not clear.
Absolutely. Well, it isn't intended, but this is precisely why. In terms of what was intended by the no vote, sorry, the vote to leave, you're right. It isn't absolutely clear what people wanted in terms of the detail beyond leaving, which is why it's important that Parliament gets a say. But with our 27 other EU partners, it's not just about immigration and the economy that we're talking about. There's a lot more that Britain can offer. So, for example, cooperation on security intelligence. We have superior intelligence services to most EU member states.
And those
that's one of the
will
things
be
that...
bilaterally
no, but the
agreed.
question
Well,
is...
Why we shouldn't cooperate on
I'm
those
not,
things.
sa-
There's
I'm, not
no reason at all.
I'm not saying that we shouldn't, but part
Well, we
of
should.
the thing you say to them when you're trying to get a deal is that that's one of the things you get from us that we can
Okay.
offer you
The-
if
we-
you give
But
us
not
what
in
we
the
We
want.
are,
Not
we
in
are
the
at
present
the
legal
start.
framework.
We are at the start of a week-long process on the hearings at the Supreme Court. So hopefully we'll hear your views again.
We can come back. We'll
You're welcome. You're welcome.
We're here.
There's plenty to talk about. Thank you all very much
Thank you.
indeed for joining
you.
us, and do let us know your thoughts.